I knew the moment Robert leaned back in his chair that something was coming, but I didn't expect him to cut me out of my own creation. Effective immediately, Marcus. Carter's vision aligns with our future, he said, the Austin skyline glowing behind him like it was mocking me. I need you to understand, this wasn't just a job. Flow State Pro was my life's work, the code I had built line by line, the thing that had taken me from a cramped apartment to the top floor of Vance Corporation. And now they were taking it from me. I stared at the open folder on his desk. $200 million in revenue. Every cent born from my work. Robert's voice was calm, like he was giving weather updates. Carter Thorne, standing smugly to the side, didn't even try to hide his grin. Evelyn Shaw, our CFO, kept her eyes on the table, as if not seeing me would make the betrayal easier. Robert slid a check across the desk. Generous severance. No hard feelings. No hard feelings? I picked up the check, not because I wanted it, but because I didn't want them to see my hand tremble. They thought they could run Flow State without me. They thought I was just the guy who built the early version. What they didn't know was that buried deep inside the code was something they'd never find. My insurance policy. The kill switch. Every 72 hours, Flow State needed my biometric signal to keep running at full capacity. Without it, the system would quietly strip itself of all advanced features, leaving only a clunky shell worth maybe $20 a month. It would look like a glitch. It would feel like a slow collapse. But it would be me. Carter stepped closer, smiling like he was already celebrating. We'll take it from here, Marcus. Go enjoy your early retirement. I gave him the smallest smile I could manage. Sure, I said, lifting the box Evelyn had placed beside me, my keyboard, my notebooks, and a coffee mug from Ben Ortiz, my most loyal developer. The walk to the elevator felt longer than usual. The hum of the office seemed to fade, replaced by a low buzz of whispered conversations. People glanced up from their screens but quickly turned back, pretending they hadn't seen me. Just before the doors closed, Ben appeared. He pressed a small burner phone into my hand, wrapped in a napkin. You'll need this, he murmured. They're doomed without you. I slipped it into my pocket without answering. The doors shut, my reflection staring back at me, a faint smile curling at the edges. The countdown had already begun. I was 26, broke, and living in an apartment that smelled like instant noodles and burnt coffee. My desk was an old folding table wedged between stacks of laundry I never had time to fold. The blinds barely worked, and the only light I had for coding came from a flickering desk lamp I'd rescued from a thrift store. Back then, every waking hour was a cycle of typing, testing, and cursing at my own logic errors. I wasn't building just another app. I was chasing a concept that felt alive. FlowState's AI wasn't about preloaded commands or static algorithms. It watched, it learned, it adapted. The longer you used it, the more it understood how you worked, until it could anticipate what you needed before you even asked. Food was an afterthought. Sometimes I'd forget to eat until my hands started shaking. My bank account was a joke, single digits on a good day. I remember one night I dug through couch cushions for change to buy another pack of ramen. But none of it mattered. The code was all that mattered. The turning point came at a downtown Austin hackathon. I'd gone there mostly for the free Wi-Fi and bad pizza. Most people were demoing chatbots or basic task apps. When it was my turn, I plugged in my laptop, hit run, and let FlowState show what it could do. The room went quiet as the AI mapped the habits of the test users in real time, reshuffling their work order before they even knew what was slowing them down. That's when Robert Vance appeared. He was in a tailored suit, looking like he'd taken a wrong turn on his way to a board meeting. He stood in the back at first, watching. When my presentation ended, he walked straight up to me. Marcus Kane. Yeah, I said, still packing up my gear. He smiled in a way that made me feel like I was already on his payroll. You code, I'll sell. We split it, 25% equity for you, the rest for growth. I didn't even hesitate. We shook hands right there, his grip firm, confident, like the deal was already sealed in stone. It felt like my way out of the ramen diet, out of the cramped apartment, out of being the guy no one noticed. That night, I went home and stared at my laptop for hours, the handshake still fresh in my mind. I didn't know if I'd just made the smartest move of my life, or the first step into something I'd never be able to take back. But I kept coding, because for the first time, I believed someone else could see what I saw in FlowState, not just software, but a living thing. And that was enough to keep me going. By the second year, The office had moved from cramped co-working spaces to a glass and steel floor with a view that made visitors whistle under their breath. That's when Robert called me into the conference room to meet someone special. Carter Thorne strolled in like the building belonged to him. Perfect hair, expensive cologne, and a smile that felt rehearsed. Robert clapped him on the shoulder. "Our growth guru," he said, as if unveiling some miracle cure. Carter shook my hand, his grip just a shade too firm. "Marcus," he said smoothly, "I've heard so much about your contributions." At first, I thought Carter was just a marketing guy who'd stay out of the code. But he had a way of inserting himself into every conversation, every meeting. I'd be halfway through explaining a new AI function when Carter would cut in with a story about aligning vision and positioning the product for scale. By the end of the meeting, whatever breakthrough I'd been describing sounded like something Carter had personally architected. In boardrooms, he was worse. My updates became team efforts, my algorithms reduced to collaborative innovation. The investors nodded along, and I could see it happening in real time, the careful erasure of my fingerprints from the company's story. Robert never corrected him. In fact, he encouraged it. "Carter's been invaluable for growth," he'd say, like I was just lucky to be in the same room. The turning point came with Microsoft. Months of technical talks, late-night debugging, and custom integrations had finally paid off. The deal was massive, $40 million in licensing and services. I'd been the one leading the technical negotiations, adjusting FlowState's core to match their workflow. When the press release hit, I read it twice to make sure I wasn't imagining it. "This milestone," Robert told the cameras, "is thanks to Carter's client strategy and vision for enterprise expansion." My name wasn't even in the footnotes. Carter didn't look at me when we crossed paths that day. He didn't have to. The win was already his in everyone's eyes. Around the office, people started referring to the Microsoft integration as Carter's deal. Like my months of work were just background noise to his pitch decks. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that the product was still mine at the core. But in every meeting, every press call, the version of history being written had less and less of me in it. Carter was planting himself at the center of the narrative, and Robert was holding the pen. It was a slow process, almost invisible day to day, but one morning I realized something. The company I'd helped build wasn't just changing, it was being rewritten. And I was being written out. It was one of those nights where the rest of the city felt like it had slipped underwater. The streets outside my apartment were silent, the only light coming from the glow of my monitors. 3 a.m., the hour when distractions vanish and your thoughts feel sharper, almost dangerous. Lines of code scrolled endlessly, my eyes darting between the main interface and the debug logs. This wasn't routine maintenance. I wasn't adding a feature or fixing a bug. I was building something that no one else could know about, something that would sit buried deep in FlowState's brain, silent until it was called to act. I kept my coffee close and my phone on silent. No music, no TV, just the hum of the PC fans and the occasional tap of my fingers on the keys. I mapped out the logic slowly, making sure it was indistinguishable from the rest of the system. The core needed to accept one very specific signal, a biometric fingerprint match tied only to me. It wouldn't happen often, just once every 72 hours. The system would send out a tiny ping, encrypted end-to-end, to a server sitting quietly in a corner of the internet. My server. If it got my authorization, it would keep running like nothing had happened. If not, the shutdown wouldn't be obvious. No alarms, no flashing lights. Just a slow dimming of its intelligence, like a mind losing its sharpness. I designed it so the degradation was subtle. On day 1 without the ping, a few milliseconds of delay would slip into processes. Day 2, predictive algorithms would start returning generic results. By day 3, the core AI functions would be gone, leaving behind a glorified to-do list app. Worth maybe $20 a month if you were generous. This wasn't about sabotage for the sake of it. I told myself that over and over. It was insurance. I had already seen how easily credit and recognition could be stripped away. If they ever tried to take everything, I wasn't going to be left powerless again. The trickiest part was hiding it. I disguised the module's function behind a mess of harmless-looking utility scripts. Any engineer trying to find it would have to dig for weeks, and even then they'd see nothing that screamed kill switch. To the untrained eye, it would look like ordinary system housekeeping. I remember leaning back in my chair, watching the final compile finish. The green checkmark appeared. No errors. No warnings. It was done. I tested it once, running it on a cloned environment. 72 hours later, the clone was useless, slow, clunky, stripped of everything that made it valuable. Watching it degrade was strangely satisfying, like proof that I'd finally taken control of something they couldn't spin or steal. The real version went live that same night, buried in an update pushed to the production servers. No one would question it. We deployed changes constantly. By morning, the code was running in every client instance across the globe, quietly checking for my signal. I shut down my screens and sat in the dark for a long moment, feeling the stillness around me. Outside, the first hint of dawn was starting to push against the skyline. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine started, a reminder that the rest of the world was just waking up. I'd built something invisible, elegant, final. They could take the office, the title, even the public credit. But they could never take this. It began with an email that landed in my inbox just before lunch. Subject, transition notice. 2 short paragraphs, stripped of warmth, outlining that my services would no longer be required after today. I didn't need to read between the lines. The decision had already been made, the goodbyes already rehearsed. When I walked into my office, Carter was there, leaning against the doorway like he was waiting for a delivery. "Pack your desk by 5, he said, grinning as if he were doing me a favor. His tone wasn't rushed, but there was an edge to it, a satisfaction he didn't bother to hide. I didn't answer. Just started with the smallest things. The pen I liked, the worn leather notebook filled with half-sketched code diagrams. My keyboard went into the box last. Each click of the packing tape felt deliberate, a steady rhythm that kept me from saying something I couldn't take back. The announcement came later that afternoon. Robert gathered a few department heads in the main lounge. He had that calm, presidential tone he liked to use in front of an audience. "Marcus laid the early groundwork for what we've built," he said. The words were polished but empty, like they'd been lifted from a script that could apply to anyone. He spoke for less than 2 minutes, and by the time he finished, the conversation had already shifted to quarterly targets. I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact with most people. Some nodded in awkward sympathy as I passed. Others acted like I'd already disappeared. That was fine. Let them believe I was gone. As I rounded the corner toward the elevator, Ben Ortiz appeared from the break room. His hoodie was zipped to the neck, and his eyes darted around to make sure no one was watching. He stepped close enough for me to smell the faint hint of coffee on his breath. From his pocket, he pulled a small burner phone wrapped in a folded napkin. "You'll need this," he said quietly. His expression carried a mix of worry and something sharper, maybe anticipation. "They're doomed without you." I didn't thank him. Didn't have to. The phone slid into my jacket pocket like it belonged there. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. The metal panels reflected a faint smile I couldn't quite suppress. Somewhere far beyond the glass walls and conference tables, something was already counting down. Outside, the sun was starting to dip, throwing long shadows across the street. The air had that early evening coolness, and the traffic hum felt distant, muted. I walked without hurry, the weight of the box balanced easily in my arms. Inside it were just things, objects anyone could replace. But the real work, the real control, was already out of their reach. By the time I reached the parking garage, I knew I'd remember this day in perfect detail. Carter's smirk, Robert's empty praise, Ben's quick glance before slipping me the phone. And most of all, the quiet certainty as I slid behind the wheel. The clock was running, and I was the only one who knew exactly what would happen when it hit 0. By the third morning, the signs were everywhere, though none of them pointed directly at me. I woke late, sunlight spilling through the blinds, and made coffee without rushing. Across the kitchen table, my laptop sat open, the console running in the background. Every so often, a small green indicator blinked off for another client instance. The quiet mark of the kill switch doing exactly what it was designed to do. The first call came not to me, but to Evelyn. I imagined her at her desk, voice tight, trying to soothe a major account whose numbers had nosedived overnight. Microsoft's internal dashboards would be crawling, recommendation engines feeding generic results, automation tasks stuck in endless loops. What they didn't know was that the slowdown wasn't a bug to patch. It was the system's natural state without me to keep it alive. An hour later, I pictured Tesla's plant floor. Long robotic arms frozen mid-swing, assembly halted with vehicles half completed. Supervisors pacing with tablets in hand, each update promising a fix in progress. In truth, the problem wasn't in their hardware at all. It was flowing from the same source, like a quiet leak in a dam that no one could locate. By mid-morning, the chatter was spilling into public channels. Employees from different companies compared notes on forums, wondering why their AI workflows suddenly felt like they'd stepped back 5 years in tech. Some blamed bad updates, others speculated about cyberattacks. The truth sat invisible beneath it all, tied to a single missing fingerprint scan. Carter, of course, had his version of events ready. Somewhere in a glass conference room, he was spinning phrases like temporary cloud latency and unexpected server congestion. I could almost hear the confident tone he used when he wanted everyone to believe the problem was already under control. It wasn't. Just before 10, my phone rang. A number I knew by heart. I let it buzz twice before answering. "Marcus," Robert said, his voice stripped of the calm polish he used in boardrooms. "We need you." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. "What's the problem?" I asked, as if I hadn't already been watching it unfold. "You know what the problem is," he said. "Flow State is underperforming. Our biggest clients are threatening to pull out." I kept my tone even. "I'm not on payroll anymore, Robert. We can talk about bringing you back." I cut him off. "My consulting rate is $3,000 an hour. Minimum 12 hours booked. Paid up front." There was a pause, just long enough to picture him glancing at Evelyn or Carter, calculating how much money they were bleeding every minute the system stayed crippled. "Send over your terms," he said finally, the weight in his voice betraying the corner he was in. When the call ended, I closed my laptop and sipped my coffee. Out there, their empire was freezing piece by piece, the countdown still ticking in the background. In here, everything was calm. I had no reason to hurry. The drive to the Tesla facility was quiet, the kind of quiet where you can feel the weight of the job before you even arrive. I'd been flown in under the title of Emergency Systems Consultant, a label that let them hide the real reason I was there. The car rolled through security gates and into a sprawl of steel and glass. Even from the parking lot, I could tell something was wrong. The air lacked the usual hum of industry. Inside, the main control room was a hive of tense motion. Technicians hunched over consoles, screens flashing red warnings in looping patterns. In the far corner, a wall of live factory feeds showed endless rows of robotic arms locked mid-gesture, car frames hanging in limbo. The usual background rhythm of assembly, the clangs, the whirs, the steady clatter of production, was gone. That's when Miguel Santos spotted me. He was built like a man who'd done his time on the factory floor before trading gloves for a clipboard. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, his ID badge clipped sideways, and his eyes locked on me like I was personally responsible for every stalled vehicle in the building. "You cost us $2 million an hour," he said without preamble. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the room, earning a few side glances from his staff. I didn't bother defending myself. Instead, I walked past him to the primary operations console. The system interface was familiar. My code lived in its veins, even if they didn't know it. I set my bag down, logged in with temporary credentials they'd issued, and plugged in my own device. Miguel stepped closer, still bristling. "Whatever fix you've got, do it fast. We've already missed 2 shipments this morning." I pulled up the authentication module, the hidden layer no one else here would have recognized. Without ceremony, I pressed my thumb to the small reader I'd brought. The machine beeped once, a simple sound, but in the control room it felt like a gunshot breaking tension. On the screens, the change was immediate. Diagnostics cleared. Error logs vanished line by line. Down on the floor, the cameras showed machines waking as if from a long sleep, arms pivoting, clamps engaging, conveyor belts grinding back into motion. The quiet was replaced with the roar of automation, the deep industrial heartbeat of the plant returning to life. Miguel's glare softened, but not much. "What the hell did you just do?" I leaned in, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "The problem isn't your factory," I said. "It's Vance Corporation." He studied me for a moment, like he was trying to decide if I was warning him or recruiting him. Then he stepped back, hands on his hips, watching the assembly lines move again. "I don't care whose fault it is," he said finally. "Just keep it running." I didn't answer. The job was done for now, but the fix here was just a symptom being treated. The real illness was still rooted miles away in a glass tower in Austin, and the clock there was still ticking. The war room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and stress. It was the kind of space designed for victory speeches, sleek table, walls lined with screens, a city view in every direction. But today it felt like a bunker under siege. I was the last to enter. Evelyn sat near the head of the table, flipping through printouts she wasn't really reading. Robert stood by the windows, hands in his pockets, jaw set tight. Carter, positioned strategically at the far end, looked like he was preparing for a fight he couldn't win, but refused to walk away from. Without saying a word, I crossed to the control panel and connected my laptop. The largest screen in the room came to life with FlowState's architecture, lines of color-coded code branching and looping like a living diagram. No corporate branding, no polished interface, just the raw guts of the system. Recognize this? I asked. My voice was calm, almost casual, but the room was quiet enough to hear the low hum of the projectors. Robert frowned. What are we looking at? I zoomed into a specific cluster buried deep in the codebase, a knot of functions most engineers would skip past without a second glance. This, I said, highlighting the section, isn't part of any feature you've pitched to clients. It's not in the documentation. In fact, unless you knew exactly where to look, you'd never even know it existed. Carter shifted in his seat. What's your point? My point, I said, toggling a view that expanded the logic tree, is that every 72 hours, FlowState runs an authentication check. A very specific one. It pings a secure server only I control. The handshake is biometric, fingerprint match, mine and mine alone. I let that hang for a beat, watching the weight of the words settle on the table. And if it doesn't get that handshake? Evelyn asked, her voice low. Then you get what you've been dealing with this week, I said. A graceful collapse. Nothing that triggers alarms or crashes the system outright. Just decay. The intelligence fades, performance drops, clients lose trust. All without leaving a trace that points to me. I tapped a single key. Instantly, the display lit up with error logs scrolling in rapid succession. The text repeated over and over. AUTH_failure, Kane_Marcus. The sound of keys clacking in the background stopped. Even the HVAC seemed quieter. Carter went pale. You put this in from the beginning? I didn't answer him directly. What you've been calling a latency issue is simply the system doing exactly what it's programmed to do when I'm not around. And right now, the clock is still running. Robert stepped forward, eyes scanning the screen like he might find some hidden off switch. There wasn't one. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly, as if she'd just realized the size of the hole they were in. I closed the display with a flick of my wrist. So, now you understand the problem. The only question is whether you want it to keep running, or watch it die. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. They knew the decision wasn't really theirs anymore. The air in the room had shifted. A few minutes earlier, they'd been clinging to the illusion that this was a negotiation. Now they were waiting to hear the terms of their survival. Evelyn was the first to move. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder, sliding it across the table until it stopped in front of me. Name your price, she said. Her tone wasn't sharp, more like someone acknowledging an overdue debt. I rested my hands on the folder without opening it. 4 things, I said. Robert stood near the window, his profile tense against the light spilling in from the skyline. Let's hear them. 1. I began my 25% equity, exactly as agreed when we started. Not a penny less, not some new vesting schedule. Full rights restored and honored. Robert didn't interrupt, but his jaw tightened. 2, I continued. A permanent seat on the board. Not as a courtesy title, not as a figurehead. I vote on every major decision, and my vote counts. I could feel Carter watching me from the far end of the table, his silence loud. 3, I said, leaning forward. I am chief architect. All code passes through me. Nothing ships without my approval. You don't touch the product without my fingerprint on it, figuratively and literally. Robert shifted, but I wasn't finished. And 4, I said, turning my eyes directly on Carter, he's gone. No consultancy, no advisory role, no quiet payout. His access to the system ends the moment this contract is signed. For the first time all morning, Carter spoke. This is a joke, right? His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. I didn't look at him. Not to me. Evelyn tapped the folder. We can draw it up exactly as stated. Robert's pen was already in his hand, but it didn't move. He glanced at the screens lining the wall, blank now, but still a reminder of the error logs they'd just seen. And if we don't? He asked quietly. I took out my phone and set it face up on the table. The small icon in the corner glowed red, its meaning lost on no one in the room. Then the clock runs out, I said. And by this time next week, Every one of your major contracts will be gone. You'll still own the name Flow State, but it'll be worth less than the office chairs you're sitting in." Silence followed, broken only by the faint tick of the wall clock. Robert looked at Evelyn. She gave the smallest nod. His pen touched the paper. "That's better," I said, sliding the folder back toward her. "Send me the finalized version by the end of the day. Until then, the system stays exactly where it is, waiting." No one spoke as I stood and walked to the door. The glow on my phone didn't change, but we all understood what it meant. They'd signed more than a contract today. They'd signed their surrender. The elevator doors slid open onto the top floor, and the quiet struck me first. Not the tense silence of a crisis, but the stillness of a place that had been reset. My new keycard worked on the first try, the small green light flashing as the C-suite unlocked for me. The hallway was brighter than I remembered, or maybe it was just the absence of certain shadows. Carter's office sat at the far end, door wide open. The desk was bare, drawers pulled out and left empty, the only trace of him a faint scent of cologne lingering in the air. Ben was waiting for me outside my own office, my real office now. He was leaning against the wall, coffee in one hand, that easy grin on his face. "They finally know who built the throne," he said. His tone was light, but I caught the edge of satisfaction under it. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The view from the window stretched across the city, the skyline sharp against the morning light. My desk had been cleared, save for a single monitor already logged into the live revenue dashboard. Numbers rolled upward in real time, the figures climbing steadily as Flow State returned to full strength. In the corner of the screen, client activity was peaking, Microsoft, Tesla, and dozens of others humming along without interruption. The recovery was already being spun as a planned system optimization in press statements. Let them dress it up however they wanted. The truth was visible in the metrics. This was my system again, running because I allowed it to. I moved through the office slowly, touching the edges of the desk, the back of the chair, the brushed steel cabinet where I'd already started keeping personal files. Everything here was new, but the sense of control was familiar, something I'd built, lost, and taken back. The phone on my desk buzzed once. I glanced at the display, a secure ping from my private server. The kill switch module's status light showed green, waiting quietly in the background. Always on. Always ready. I silenced the alert and looked back at the city. This wasn't the same company I'd joined years ago. The structure, the players, even the story they told the world, all of it had shifted. But at its core, the heart of Flow State still beat to my signal. Ben tapped on the glass wall before leaving. "Lunch later?" he asked. "Yeah," I said without turning. When the door clicked shut, I let the moment stretch, the hum of the servers filling the quiet. Out there, they could call me a partner, a leader, a board member. In here, I knew the truth. The empire was running again, stronger than ever. And it would keep running, as long as I wanted it to. Do you think I was right to take back Flow State on my own terms? Or should I have given Robert and the team another chance? I'm really curious to know what you think. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed my story, make sure to follow so you don't miss the next one.